"Hey old man, did you get lost on your way to the museum?" The remark sliced through the noisy lunch rush of the Naval Amphibious Base Coronado dining hall, sharp enough to bend the room's atmosphere a few degrees colder. Petty Officer Reed Callahan, tall, muscular, and swagger-filled in the way only a young SEAL could be, stood with two teammates flanking him like sentries, their trays overflowing with the mountain of calories needed to keep warriors carved from steel clattered onto the table beside the lone, elderly man they had cornered. Before we get started, be sure to subscribe to Veteran Valor Stories channel so you never miss these fascinating tales of courage. And let us know in the comments where you're watching today. At the center of their tightening ring sat Henry Dalton, 86 years old, small and quietly composed, his thinning silver hair glowing faintly beneath the fluorescent lights. He wore a brown wool jacket, too old-fashioned for this place, too soft among the sea of sleek uniforms and tactical gear. He didn't look up from his bowl of Navy-issue chili. His hand, spotted with age but steady as a metronome, lifted another spoonful to his lips. Callahan leaned a little closer, letting his shadow swallow the old man's table. "I said I'm talking to you," he pressed, his voice dripping with performative irritation. "This is a secure facility. You need a reason to be here. Or did you just wander off from a retirement home?" A few sailors nearby shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke. The mess hall never fully quieted, yet the tone of its noise changed. Voices dropped. Utensils paused mid-air, heads tilted in the old man's direction. Callahan wasn't just provoking someone. He was putting on a show. And Henry, sitting motionless and unbothered, had become the unwilling prop. Henry finally set down his spoon, its metal making no sound against the tray. His movements were slow, economical, almost deliberate in their refusal to respond. He still didn't acknowledge Callahan's looming presence. Callahan mistook that silence for weakness. He planted both tattooed forearms on Henry's table, his voice lowering into something darker. "Look at me. When I ask a question, I expect an answer. So let's start simple. Who are you, and what exactly are you doing on my base?" That last phrase, "my base," hung in the air like a sour taste. Henry lifted his eyes at last. Pale blue, faded with age yet still carrying an unmistakable depth. Callahan felt an unexpected jolt in his chest, just for a second, as though he were staring into a lake frozen solid, hiding unimaginable weight beneath its surface. But Henry said nothing. One of the SEALs behind Callahan scoffed. "Guy's probably deaf. Or senile." Callahan gestured sharply with his hand. "ID, now." Everyone knew he had no authority to demand identification from a visitor in a cafeteria. But no one intervened, not when the aggressor was a SEAL, with a reputation for intensity bordering on volatility. Henry reached, not for his wallet but for his plastic cup of water. He took a slow sip. The quiet around their table stretched thin, the tension like an invisible wire pulling taut. Callahan's face darkened with embarrassment, then anger. The old man's calm indifference wasn't just defiance. It was humiliation delivered without a single word. "That's it," Callahan snapped, his temper boiling over. "You're coming with me. Get up." His hand shot forward toward the lapel of Henry's jacket, stopping on a small, tarnished pin, two stylized wings framing a tiny shield. Its dulled surface looked nearly worn smooth. "You bought this at a surplus store?" Callahan sneered. "What, trying to impress someone?" But Henry's mind was already far away. The noise of the hall dissolved. The heat of the chili vanished. The polished floor was replaced by wet sand and the metallic scent of cordite. Somewhere overhead, the unmistakable scream of a diving enemy aircraft tore through the sky. And too close, a young man's hand gripped his shoulder, steady and terrified. "You make it home, Hank. You hear me? You make it home." The memory lasted only the length of a breath. Yet it swallowed him whole before letting him return to the present. Across the room, Seaman Tyler Brooks, 19 years old and painfully new to Navy life, was watching from behind the serving line. He had seen arrogance. He had seen ego. But what unfolded before him felt like sacrilege. His own grandfather, a Marine who fought at Key, Son had once been dismissed with the same casual cruelty by people who didn't understand sacrifice. Brooks's gaze darted from Callahan's tightening grip to Henry's unflinching stillness. The other sailors pretended not to see, retreating into their lunches. Callahan's teammates wore lazy smirks of approval. Brooks's heart pounded. He knew he couldn't intervene physically, not against a SEAL. Not without ending his career before it began, but doing. Nothing felt worse than his eyes landed on the wall phone. In the back kitchen, a lifeline no one else seemed to notice, without allowing himself the chance to rethink. He slipped away from the serving line and into the clatter of pots and steam. His hands trembled as he lifted the receiver and dialed Master Chief's office. A yeoman answered. I need to speak to him, now, it's urgent," Brooks whispered, turning to glance through the service window. Callahan was now tugging Henry's arm. "He's in a meeting," the yeoman said flatly. "If this is about a mess hall issue, contact the MIS." "No, you don't understand," Brooks insisted, breath quickening. "A SEAL petty officer Callahan is harassing an elderly veteran. He's putting his hands on him. His name is Henry Dalton." Silence. So sudden Brooks thought the line had died. Then the yeoman spoke again, voice barely audible. "Master Chief, you need to hear this." A new voice emerged, granite hard, unmistakably authoritative. "This is Master Chief Wyatt Mercer." "Say that name again, son." Brooks straightened instinctively. "Seaman Brooks, galley crew. Petty Officer Callahan is trying to drag a civilian named Henry Dalton out of the mess hall." Another silence. He heard a chair scrape violently against the floor. Then Mercer's voice, low and dangerous. "Keep your eyes on Henry Dalton. Do not let him out of your sight. Help is coming." The line went dead. And in the mess hall, as Callahan continued to pull on Henry's frail arm, the room seemed to collectively hold its breath, unaware that something far bigger than a petty confrontation had just begun to move. The mess hall's atmosphere had shifted into something brittle, a quiet so unnatural that even the ventilation seemed to hush itself. Petty Officer Reed Callahan tightened his grip on Henry Dalton's thin forearm, tugging him with rising impatience. Henry did not resist, but neither did he yield. He merely rose slowly, as though he were deciding on his own terms to stand. Not because a young man had demanded it. Callahan interpreted the calmness as defiance. "Let's go, Grandpa," he muttered. "We're going to have a little chat about trespassing on a naval installation." But before he could take a step, the double doors at the entrance thundered open. The sound slammed through the room, startling nearly every sailor to their feet. The doors hit the walls with such force that a few plates rattled on nearby tables. 3 figures stood framed in the doorway. First, the base commander, Captain Richard Avery, ribbons blazing across his chest. Jaw clenched so tightly the muscle near his temple twitched. His eyes burned straight across the hall, locking instantly on Callahan and Henry. Beside him, the towering silhouette of Master Chief Wyatt Mercer, his cover tucked under one arm, his face carved from stone. His presence seemed to absorb all ambient sound, drawing attention without effort, and between them, walking forward with slow, commanding steps, was Vice Admiral Jonathan Hawley, in a crisp white uniform so bright it almost glowed beneath the fluorescent lights. 3 silver stars glittered on each shoulder, and the sheer weight of his rank made the air feel heavier. For a full second, the entire hall froze. Then reaction rippled outward. Chairs scraped, boots thudded, bodies snapped upright. Sailors saluted, officers stiffened, utensils clattered to trays left half-eaten. Everyone except Callahan. whose body was locked in place, hand still clutching Henry Dalton's sleeve. Admiral. Hawley never returned salutes as quickly as he did that day. In fact, he didn't return them at all. He ignored the formalities, ignored protocol, and ignored the stunned crowd whose eyes followed him like witnesses at an unfolding trial. His gaze, sharp, cutting, unbearably focused, zeroed in on the young SEAL and the elderly man beside him. As the Admiral approached, Callahan's confidence evaporated. What had moments earlier been a performance of dominance now felt like a monumental miscalculation. His fingertips tingled where they gripped Henry Dalton's coat, and suddenly the contact felt wrong, sacrilegious, even. Finally, Callahan released the old man's arm, stepping back half a pace. It wasn't respect. It was fear. Admiral Hawley stopped directly in front of them. His silence pressed down like atmospheric pressure before a storm. He looked first at Henry, calm, breathing steadily. Eyes trained not on the Admiral but on some invisible horizon of his own, and then at the young SEAL, whose bravado had withered into ash. Then the Admiral did the unthinkable. He drew his heels together, spine straight, and saluted. Not a casual salute, not a polite gesture for show, but a sharp, precise, textbook perfect salute that cut through the air like an honor blade. Gasps rippled through the room, dozens of them, involuntary and stunned. A 3-star admiral saluting a man in a worn tweed jacket? Impossible, unimaginable. Mr. Dalton, the Admiral said, voice warm but reverent. Sir, it is an honor. Callahan nearly doubled over from the watery jolt that shot through his stomach. His teammates behind him exchanged looks of pure horror. The Admiral lowered his hand, then turned with a colder tone that carried across the hall. Ladies and gentlemen, for those who do not recognize the man standing before you, this is Henry Dalton, former combat diver of the Navy's underwater demolition teams, a forerunner to the SEALs. The whisper net ran instantly through the hall. SEALs straightened unconsciously. Officers shifted on their heels, but the Admiral wasn't done. In 1944, he continued, Henry Dalton and his 12-man team were deployed to the Leyte coastline under the code name Operation Iron Tide. Only a handful in the room had ever heard the words Iron Tide of the entire team, the Admiral said. Only one man survived past the first night. One man completed the mission. One man crawled through reefs, swam through minefields, and neutralized 3 enemy communication nodes with improvised charges alone. Mouths fell open. Eyes widened. The silence deepened. For his actions, Henry Dalton was awarded the Medal of Honor. The words felt heavy enough to tilt the room. Some sailors visibly swallowed. Some looked away, ashamed of having watched the earlier humiliation without speaking. Callahan's face had drained of color, leaving only a chalky, shaken pallor. The Admiral's voice softened. The pin on his lapel, this one. He gestured gently, as though pointing to something sacred. It was given to him by the man who died at his side during the operation. It is not a trinket. It is a legacy. The base commander stepped forward, his glare fixed on Callahan. Petty officer, he said quietly, dangerously, you have disgraced your uniform. Callahan's jaw trembled. He tried to speak, but nothing came out, his throat too tight, his chest too hollow. You will report to my office in 5 minutes, Captain Avery continued. Master-at-Arms will escort you. Bring your full service record, and pray that whatever shred of professionalism you have left is enough to keep you in uniform. Yes, sir, Callahan managed, voice barely audible, but before the base commander could say more, Henry Dalton finally spoke. He's just a boy, Henry murmured, lifting his gaze to the Admiral. Let him learn. Don't destroy him for a single mistake. The Admiral turned, stunned by the unexpected mercy. Mercer, too, blinked, as if trying to reconcile the quiet, frail elder with the legendary ghost whose file had been memorized by generations of divers. Callahan's breath hitched, a faint, strangled sound. It was the first crack in his emotional armor, and it stung sharper than any reprimand. Henry's calm, soft voice carried into the stunned quiet of the hall. The Navy made him strong. Life will make him wise. The words settled like dust across the room, gentle and heavy at once. And for the first time since the confrontation began, Callahan lowered his gaze in genuine remorse. The mess hall remained suspended in a stunned silence long after the confrontation had ended. Conversations that had once filled the room with familiar noise now seemed distant, hesitant, like people were afraid that a single careless word might shatter the fragile gravity left behind. Henry Dalton stood quietly beside the table, his hand lightly resting on the back of his chair. The Admiral, the base commander, and Master Chief Mercer formed a small half-circle around him, their bodies angled protectively. As though he were a relic that needed guarding, Callahan had been escorted out moments earlier by 2 master-at-arms. Though his footsteps had been steady, the tremor in his fingers betrayed the storm raging inside him. The once arrogant SEAL, revered in some corners of the base, had looked like a chastened young recruit being forced to confront the weight of his own ignorance. Back in the mess hall, Admiral Halley turned to Henry with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with the authority he had wielded moments before. "Henry," he said softly, "we truly are honored that you're here today. We expected your arrival later this afternoon." Henry smiled faintly, deep lines forming around his eyes. "The bus was early," he replied. "Figured I'd get a bowl of chili to pass the time." Master Chief Mercer exchanged a glance with the Admiral, one filled with unspoken acknowledgement. A man who had survived the horrors of underwater demolition warfare, who had crawled through reefs under fire and carried the ghosts of his fallen teammates for decades, had chosen to pass his time with something as simple as cafeteria chili. Mercer stepped forward. "Sir, is there anything you need? Anything we can get for you?" His voice held a rare tenderness, one reserved only for legends and memories. Henry shook his head. "No, son. I'm not fragile. Just old." His gaze drifted back toward the table where the confrontation had begun. "But thank you." Across the room, the sailors who had watched the entire scene unfold now stood frozen between awe and shame. Some stared at Henry, trying to reconcile the frail frame before them with the Medal of Honor recipient they had just learned about. Others looked down at their boots, unable to meet the eyes of the man they had allowed to be mocked. Brooks, the young seaman who had made the desperate phone call, lingered behind the serving line, his heart still pounding like a drum in his ribcage. When the Admiral and the others had arrived, he'd felt a rush of adrenaline, but now he felt something else. Responsibility. Mercer approached him quietly, startling him so badly that he nearly dropped the ladle he was holding. "Seaman Brooks," Mercer said, folding his huge hands behind his back. "Step over here." Brooks swallowed hard and followed the Master Chief to a quieter corner of the hall. He could feel dozens of eyes tracking them. Mercer's posture was imposing, broad shoulders squared, jaw locked, voice low. "You did the right thing," Mercer said, surprising the young sailor. "You did what many men twice your rank and experience failed to do today." Brooks blinked, unsure how to respond. I just didn't want to stand there and watch, Master Chief." Mercer studied him, eyes narrowing not with suspicion, but with a hard-earned respect. "Most people don't want to watch, but they do anyway. That's the difference." Brooks lowered his gaze. "I still feel like I overstepped." "Callahan was a SEAL." Mercer snorted, a sound halfway between frustration and amusement. "Being a SEAL doesn't give someone the right to forget the very history that built the teams in the first place." His tone darkened, the weight of institutional memory filling his chest. Dalton's generation laid the foundation for every dive platform, every demolition drill, every insertion tactic our operators use today. Men like him paid the tuition for the education Callahan loves to brag about. Brooks nodded slowly. absorbing the words like they were scripture. "But listen to me carefully, son," Mercer added, lowering his voice. "This kind of moment, it will follow you. Some will admire what you did. Others will resent it. And some," he exhaled, "some will pretend they didn't see anything at all." Brooks felt a heavy knot form in his stomach, but he nodded. "I can live with that, Master Chief. I just couldn't leave him there." Mercer placed a firm hand on Brooks's shoulder. "Then you're exactly what this uniform needs." Across the hall, Admiral Hawley guided Henry Dalton gently toward a quieter table near the wall, away from the crowd that had begun to gather at a respectful distance. Captain Avery followed them closely, his expression still etched with disbelief that something so volatile had happened on his watch. "Henry," the Admiral said again, "we truly are sorry you were treated like that." Henry settled into the chair slowly, one hand bracing the table. "I didn't come here for apologies," he murmured. "Young men have always been arrogant. It's how they test the world." The Admiral exhaled, shoulders relaxing slightly. "Even so, he crossed a line." Henry's gaze remained calm. "Only because he's never seen what lies on the other side." His words were quiet, but the emotional weight behind them landed like a stone in the Admiral's chest. Captain Avery cleared his throat. "Admiral, if you'd like, we can clear the hall, give Mr. Dalton some space." Henry shook his head gently before the Admiral could respond. "Let them stay," he said. "Let them see that I'm not made of glass. The world didn't break me when I was 20, it won't break me now." Mercer and the Admiral shared another glance. Behind them, sailors had begun to resume their meals, though much more quietly. A few whispered. More simply watched, uncertain how to balance their awe with their discomfort. Brooks, having been dismissed by Mercer, rejoined the serving line. His hands still trembling slightly, but his head held higher. Henry lifted his cup of water and took a slow, measured sip, just as he had before the confrontation began. The tremor of memory that had carried him briefly back to that violent, distant shoreline faded gently, leaving behind only the quiet hum of the mess hall once more. "You know," Henry said softly, staring at the water in his cup, "in my day, the quietest men were usually the ones you should worry about." The Admiral smiled faintly. "That hasn't changed much." Henry set the cup down. And for the first time since the chaos began, he let the room breathe with him, an old warrior surrounded by young ones, all of them learning, each in their own way, the invisible weight carried by the quietest heroes. The rest of the afternoon unfolded with a strange, almost reverent calm that seemed to settle over the entire base. News of the incident traveled with the speed of wildfire whispers drifting through offices, across training fields, down barracks hallways. By the time the sun had dipped low enough to turn the Coronado buildings into silhouettes of steel and shadow, nearly everyone on base had heard some version of what had happened, but none of the rumors carried the full truth. Only those in the mess hall had seen the absolute stillness in Henry Dalton's eyes, the weight of memory that had washed over him like a tide returning after decades. Only they had seen a 3-star admiral salute a man wearing a fraying tweed jacket. And only they had witnessed a young SEAL, so sure of his own invincibility, crack open beneath the realization of how little he understood of true sacrifice. Captain Avery returned to his office shortly after. His anger cooled into a cold, disciplined resolve. He reviewed Callahan's record with grim efficiency: commended operations, successful deployments, excellent physical standards, and a pattern of disciplinary notes that suddenly felt much heavier now that they were illuminated by the morning's incident. Across base, Callahan sat alone in a small waiting area outside the commanding officer's office. The hallway was quiet, lit by a single overhead fluorescent bulb that flickered just enough to keep his thoughts drifting like unsettled sand. He still wore his uniform, but something in the way it clung to his shoulders made it look less like the armor of an elite warrior and more like an oversized reminder of expectations he had failed to meet. His hands, trained to load magazines, cut through water, and steady rifles in impossible conditions, shook faintly against his knees. The humiliation wasn't what gnawed at him. It was the look in the Admiral's eyes, disappointment, but not anger. A deeper kind of disappointment, the kind that said you should have known better. But the worst part wasn't even the Admiral. It was Henry. The old man's mercy struck like a blow. A man who had survived the unspeakable, who had crawled through darkness and death and saltwater terror, had forgiven him with a softness Callahan did not deserve. That single quiet sentence, "He's just a boy," replayed in his head over and over, each repetition cutting deeper. A door opened down the hall. "Petty officer." The voice was firm, controlled. "The commander will see you now." Callahan rose, spine stiff despite the sinking weight in his stomach, and stepped into the office. Captain Avery sat behind his desk, the blinds drawn so that the only light in the room came from the narrow beam spilling across the floor. It made the space feel colder, more clinical. "Sit." Callahan obeyed. Captain Avery studied him for a long moment, fingers steepled together. "Your record," he said finally, "suggests potential. Discipline, endurance, tactical capability. But potential without humility becomes poison. And what happened in the mess hall today was the perfect example." Callahan swallowed hard. He didn't try to speak. "Not yet. You made assumptions," Avery continued. "You escalated without cause. You forgot the cornerstone of this uniform: respect. Not for the rank, not for the system, but for the people who built the ground we stand on." Callahan forced himself to meet the captain's eyes. "Sir, I regret it. All of it." "I know you do," Avery replied. "Regret is easy. Reflection is harder. Growth is harder still." He leaned forward slightly. "You are not being removed from the teams, not today. Henry Dalton himself asked that you be given the chance to learn, not be destroyed." Callahan exhaled shakily, something between relief and shame. He hadn't expected mercy. He definitely hadn't earned it. "But," Avery added, voice sharpening, "you will be placed on behavioral probation for 6 months. You will undergo mandatory heritage training. You will write a 2,000-word essay on the origins of naval special warfare. And you will deliver it directly to Master Chief Mercer." Callahan nodded. "Understood, sir." "No," Avery said quietly. "Not yet. Understanding means you carry this with you. Every mission, every training cycle, every moment you put on that trident." Callahan's shoulders slumped slightly, a quiet acknowledgement of the weight he had invited onto his own back. "I won't forget this, sir." "You'd better not," Avery replied. Dismissed. Callahan stood, saluted, and walked out with measured steps. The hallway felt longer, colder. But for the first time in a long time, he felt something shift inside him, not pride, not fury. Humility. Elsewhere on the base, the Admiral escorted Henry toward the small memorial garden near the water. The air smelled faintly of salt and eucalyptus. Benches lined a path shaded by palms, and plaques displayed names of fallen divers, dating back to the earliest days of naval demolition units. Henry paused near one of the plaques, fingertips brushing lightly against the engraved metal. The expression on his face softened, half sorrow, half remembrance. "They were kids," he whispered. "Most of them younger than that seal today." Admiral Holly lowered his gaze. "War takes children and makes old men of them long before their time." Henry nodded. "I was 20 when they pinned that insignia on me. I didn't feel like a hero that day. I felt like the last survivor of a mistake." The Admiral's chest tightened. "You carried them with honor." Henry gave a small, tired smile. "I carried them because no one else could." The two men stood in silence for a moment, framed by the soft rustle of leaves and the distant crash of waves. It was the kind of silence that didn't need filling, the silence of two men who understood loss, service, and the impossibility of separating the two. When Henry finally turned to leave, the Admiral reached out gently. "We'll honor them today at the ceremony. All of them. And especially you." Henry chuckled softly. "Don't make a fuss on my account." The Admiral's reply was quiet but firm. "Some men deserve a fuss, Henry." In the galley, Seaman Brooks washed dishes mechanically, though his mind wasn't on the plates or utensils. He kept replaying what he had witnessed, not with the naive awe of a young sailor seeing his first admiral up close, but with the dawning realization that one choice can redefine a person's entire trajectory. And he wondered what would happen when he saw Henry Dalton again, because deep down, he knew this wasn't the end of the story. Not for Callahan, not for Henry, not for any of them. 3 weeks later, Coronado was washed in a calm, gold-tinged haze, the kind of soft California brightness that made even the concrete walkways feel warmer. Spring had settled over the base, bringing with it a steady breeze that carried the mingled scents of salt water, sunscreen, and freshly cut grass. Henry Dalton sat quietly on a park bench overlooking the shoreline. He came here often during the afternoons, sometimes with a newspaper folded in his jacket pocket, sometimes with nothing at all except the slow rhythm of his thoughts. Today, he had brought half of a turkey sandwich wrapped neatly in wax paper. Seagulls circled overhead, their shadows gliding across the sand. Henry tore small pieces from the sandwich and tossed them gently toward the birds gathered at his feet. Their squawking formed a kind of lopsided chorus, irregular, messy, but comfortingly alive. He didn't notice the approaching footsteps at first, not until they hesitated several yards away. A familiar presence lingered there, uncertain and heavy. Henry looked up. Reed Callahan stood a respectful distance away, his uniform crisp, posture stiff. But the swagger, the careless, almost theatrical confidence he once carried, was gone. In its place was something quieter, rawer. "Mr. Dalton," Callahan said, voice barely above the whisper of wind. "Sir, may I sit?" Henry studied him for a long second, not out of mistrust, just observation. Then he nodded lightly toward the opposite end of the bench. "Sit down, son." Callahan obeyed, lowering himself carefully as though the bench might protest his weight. He folded his hands together, elbows on his knees, staring at the ground between his boots. For several breaths, neither man spoke. The waves rolled in a steady hush behind them. Finally, Callahan exhaled. "I've been trying to figure out the right words, but I don't think there are any that fit. Not really." Henry chuckled softly. "Words rarely fit the first time. Try anyway." Callahan swallowed, the muscles in his throat working visibly. "I'm sorry," he said. "Not just for disrespecting you, but for not knowing better. For not understanding the history I claim to represent. For thinking the uniform makes the man, instead of the other way around." Henry didn't respond immediately. He watched a gull waddle forward, bold and unafraid, and flicked a crumb toward it. "Do you know the first lesson they taught us out there?" Henry asked suddenly. Callahan blinked. "No, sir. That water doesn't care who you are. It doesn't care about rank or pride or the trident on your chest. It only respects skill, discipline, and humility. Those who forget that—" Henry's voice softened. "Get swallowed." Callahan bowed his head. "I think I've learned that now." Henry regarded him again, really looked at him. The boyish arrogance was gone, replaced by a young man with edges softened by consequence. The kind who understood, maybe for the first time, that strength was more burden than privilege. "You're not a bad man," Henry said gently. "Not even a foolish one. Just young. And youth makes us think we're invincible until something reminds us otherwise." Callahan's voice wavered. "I didn't deserve your forgiveness." "Maybe not," Henry agreed. "But you needed it. Silence fell between them again, this time warm, restorative. Callahan shifted in his seat. Master Chief Mercer had me write that 2,000-word essay. Took me 4 tries to get it right. He made me stand there while he read it. Didn't say a word for almost 10 minutes. Henry smirked. Wyatt always did like dramatic pauses. A surprised laugh escaped Callahan, quiet, but real. He told me the teams weren't built by men like me. He hesitated. He said they were built by men like you. Henry raised a brow. Is that what you think? Callahan took a long breath. I think the teams were built on the backs of men who didn't come home. And you were the one who had to live with their ghosts. Henry's gaze drifted toward the water. The memories came not as violent flashes this time, but as soft silhouettes, shapes of faces, echoes of laughter. The weight of an insignia pressed into his palm beneath a bleeding sky. I carry them, Henry said finally. But carrying isn't the same as being crushed. You learn to walk with the weight. They wanted me to. Callahan nodded slowly. You know, Henry added, for all your mistakes, you did one thing right. What's that? You came back. Callahan went very still, his breath catching. He hadn't realized until now how much he needed to hear that, how much the path to redemption had felt like walking uphill with no guarantee of forgiveness waiting at the top. You remind me of someone I once knew, Henry said after a moment. Stubborn, loud, good heart, even if he buried it under too much confidence. Sounds like a handful, Callahan murmured. He was, Henry said. But he became a good man. Better than he expected. Callahan turned toward him. Do you think I can be that? Henry looked him straight in the eye, calm and unflinching. I think you already started. The breeze picked up, brushing through Callahan's hair. He stared out at the horizon, steady, quiet, humbled. And for the first time since the incident, the knot in his chest loosened, not completely, but enough for him to breathe. Without shame weighing down every breath, Henry reached for the last piece of his sandwich and handed it to him. Feed the gulls, he said. They're impatient creatures. Callahan accepted the small offering, smiling sheepishly as a bird strutted toward him with bold entitlement. He tossed the crumb. The seagull snapped it up instantly, wings flaring in triumph before retreating to its flock. Henry stood slowly, leaning lightly on the bench as he rose. Walk with me, he said. Callahan stood too. Where to? To the memorial, Henry replied. I want to show you their names. Seems only right. Callahan's breath hitched, an honor he hadn't expected. Together, they began down the path toward the small garden where bronze and steel carried the weight of history. Their footsteps fell in the same steady rhythm, the old diver with a lifetime of ghosts, and the young SEAL learning how to earn his own quiet place in the long, unbroken line of warriors. And though neither said it aloud, both knew the truth. This was not just an ending. It was the beginning of who Callahan would become, and the final, gentle passing of wisdom from one generation's ghost to the next.